There are some connections that feel less like meeting someone and more like recognizing something, where the pull is immediate and slightly unsettling, like your nervous system knew before your mind caught up, where the chemistry does not feel casual or optional, where from almost the beginning there is a quality of intensity that neither person fully chose and neither person quite knows what to do with. If you have been in this dynamic, if you are an empath who has loved an avoidant, or if you are reading this trying to understand why this specific type of person keeps finding their way into your life, then you already know that what I just described is not an exaggeration. The attraction between an empath and an avoidant is not ordinary attraction. It is something older and more complicated, something that feels destined from the outside and devastating from the inside. Understanding why requires going underneath the surface of both people, not just their behaviours, their architecture, the specific way each of them was built, and why those two particular structures create the most magnetic and most painful combination in the entire landscape of human attachment. Start with the empath. An empath is not simply a sensitive person. Sensitivity is a trait. Empathy at this level is an orientation. It is a way of moving through the world where other people's emotional states are not background information, they are foreground experience. The empath does not just notice when someone is in pain, they feel it, not metaphorically, in their own body, their own nervous system, their own emotional landscape. The boundary between their feeling and another person's feeling is genuinely thinner than it is for most people. This did not arrive from nowhere. In the majority of cases, deep empathy of this kind was developed in an environment where reading other people's emotions was not optional, where the emotional atmosphere of the home was unpredictable enough that attunement to others became a survival skill, where being aware of how the people around you were feeling before they expressed it was the difference between safety and disruption. The empath learned very early to prioritize the emotional experience of others, to be extraordinarily skilled at sensing need, at offering comfort, at creating safety for people who do not know how to ask for it. And that skill became identity, became the primary way they understood their own value and their own role in relationships. Now the avoidant. The avoidant learned something almost opposite, and in some cases from a not entirely different kind of environment. Where the empath learned that their value lay in attunement to others, the avoidant learned that their safety lay in self-sufficiency, that needing people produced disappointing results, that emotional expression created vulnerability that was not met with care, but with discomfort, dismissal, or inconsistency, that the most reliable way to navigate relationships was to need as little as possible, feel as privately as possible, and maintain enough internal distance from their own emotions that those emotions could never become a liability. The avoidant is not unfeeling. This is the most fundamental misunderstanding about this attachment style. The avoidant feels deeply, often more deeply than they can manage, which is precisely why the management system exists. What the avoidant learned was not to stop feeling, it was to stop showing feeling, to create a self that functioned independently of emotional need, that could engage with others from behind a layer of self-protection that kept the most vulnerable parts safely out of reach. So here is the empath, someone who is extraordinarily attuned, who leads with emotional availability, who finds deep meaning in being the person someone can finally open up to, someone whose love language is essentially radical presence, who gives people the experience of being fully seen and fully held and fully accepted, often before those people have said a single word about what they need. And here is the avoidant. Someone who has spent their entire relational life feeling subtly alien in intimacy, vaguely unable to access the kind of ease that other people seem to have in relationships, carrying a private longing for genuine connection that their defense system continuously overrules. Someone who has learned to manage emotional closeness from a distance, but who, at a core level, is as hungry for real intimacy as any human being is. Now put them in the same room. The empath feels the avoidant immediately, not just as an attractive person, as a project, though they would not use that word, as someone with a rich, complicated interior that is not being expressed, as someone who is present and guarded simultaneously in a way that the empath's instincts read as a door with a lock they were born knowing how to open. The avoidant feels the empath immediately too, and what they feel is something they have almost never felt before. They feel felt. understood before they have explained themselves, seen in a way that does not feel invasive because it comes wrapped in warmth rather than demand. The empath's attunement, which in any other context might feel like too much closeness, arrives in a form that the avoidant's nervous system can actually receive. It feels, for the avoidant, like the specific kind of safety they have been quietly constructing fantasies about their entire life. Someone who understands them without requiring them to be vulnerable. Someone whose warmth arrives unconditionally rather than as an exchange for emotional openness. And for the empath, the avoidant feels like depth, like substance, like a person who is genuinely complex in a way that rewards attention. The restraint, the guardedness, the sense that there is significantly more happening beneath the surface than is being offered. All of this activates the empath's most fundamental orientation. The belief that their love, applied skillfully and patiently enough, can reach the unreachable parts. This is where the attraction becomes the trap, because what each person is responding to in the other is, in part, a wound recognizing a wound. The empath's deep attunement was not developed in a vacuum. It was developed in response to emotional unpredictability, which means emotional unpredictability at a nervous system level feels like home, feels like familiar, feels like the environment in which the empath knows exactly who to be and exactly what skills to deploy. An avoidant's push and pull, their warmth followed by distance, their moments of genuine connection followed by retreat, all of this maps onto the emotional landscape the empath's nervous system was originally calibrated for. The avoidant's longing for unconditional warmth without vulnerability demand did not develop in a vacuum either. It developed in response to an environment where emotional need was not safely met, which means the empath's offering, warmth without conditions, understanding without explicit request, feels like the specific antidote to the specific wound the avoidant has been carrying. They are not just attracted to each other, they are completing a circuit that was built long before they met. The fear arrives precisely because the attraction is so complete. For the empath, the fear is not of the avoidant's distance. It is of what the distance reveals about themselves. Because in pursuing the avoidant, in pouring their extraordinary capacity for love into someone who cannot fully receive it, the empath starts to confront the part of themselves that does not believe they are worth choosing without earning it. The part that equates loving someone who is hard to reach with loving correctly. That confuses the labour of loving an avoidant with the depth of the love itself. The avoidant's distance is painful, but it is also, in a way that is deeply uncomfortable to name, familiar. It activates the empath's purpose, and anything that activates your purpose, even when it is hurting you, is very difficult to walk away from. For the avoidant, the fear is more straightforward in its source and more complex in its expression. The empath is the most threatening person the avoidant has ever encountered, not because they are demanding or intense or difficult, because they are none of those things. Because the empath's warmth and attunement and radical acceptance strip away every defense the avoidant has ever used to keep intimacy at a manageable distance. The usual tools do not work. Going quiet does not make the empath angry or punishing. They respond with patience. Creating distance does not make the empath withdraw their care. They hold space. Being emotionally guarded does not make the empath give up. They find other ways in. Every strategy the avoidant has relied on to manage closeness fails in the face of someone who responds to all of it with steady, unconditional warmth. And that failure is terrifying, because if the tools do not work, the avoidant has to either choose vulnerability deliberately, which the entire defense system exists to prevent, or run from the person who is, paradoxically, the safest person they have ever encountered. Most avoidants run, not because the empath was wrong for them, because they were so right that staying required becoming someone the avoidant did not yet know how to be. The tragedy of this dynamic is not that they were incompatible, it is that they were almost perfectly matched at the level of wound, and almost perfectly mismatched at the level of readiness. The empath is ready to go deep from almost the first moment, ready to offer the kind of love that asks for nothing and gives everything, ready to be the safe harbour the avoidant has been quietly searching for their entire life. The avoidant wants exactly that. At a core level, beneath all the defence and the distance and the managed self-sufficiency, they want exactly what the empath is offering. But wanting something and being able to receive it are not the same thing. And an avoidant who has not done the internal work of understanding their own patterns will do what the defence system always does when the thing it was protecting against finally arrives. It will push it away. What the empath needs to understand, and what takes an honest kind of courage to sit with, is this. The love you gave was not wasted because it was not received the way it deserved to be. The capacity you have, that extraordinary, rare, deeply human capacity for attunement and unconditional care, is not a flaw that made you vulnerable to the wrong person. It is the truest thing about you, but it needs a home that can hold it, not a project, not a wound to heal, not a person whose primary relationship with your love is the management of how much of it they allow themselves to feel. The attraction between you and the avoidant was real. The connection was real. The recognition that happened the moment you encountered each other was real. What was not real was the idea that love alone, however vast and genuine and patiently offered, is sufficient to bridge the gap between someone who is ready to be fully present and someone who is still at war with what full presence requires of them. That bridge has to be built from both sides. And until the avoidant decides to pick up their materials, the empath, standing on their end of it, waiting, is not love in its fullest expression. It is hope wearing love's clothing. And you, of all people, deserve the real thing.